All right, so we got the last little chapter for this next unit exam. This is a big one. This is an important one for all of these various different steps in cellular respiration, and cellular respiration is just how we are making energy, all right? There are a number of places, okay, that are going to be involved to help make us energy. For all of them, 1, 2, 3, and there's a fourth one. It's not very big. For these 3 that are listed on this slide, as well as fermentation, I am going to ask where they occur, what enters the reaction, and what is yielded in the reaction, okay? So for all of these pathways for cellular respiration, you need to know where they happen, what enters reaction, and what do you get out of the reaction. Okay, what are the products? All right. So what enters? What's the reactant? What do you get out of it? The products. All right. So for glycolysis, the transition reaction, for Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, however you want to call it, and the electron transport chain, I'm going to be asking these questions. Where are they occurring? What enters? And what do you get out of it? All right. Obviously, I would ask it as any type, multiple choice, true, false, matching, short answer, / essay, whatever you want to call it. So I've asked them all different ways, all right? So you should be really prepared for this unit, or this chapter, I guess, with what I'm really wanting to get out of it, all right, from this chapter here, all right? We've looked at Krebs cycle, kind of, when we looked at carbohydrate fixation within the plant. It's a little different in an animal because we're animals and not plants. We've already seen the electron transport chain. We saw it as this way of passing electrons from one photosystem to the next with photosynthesis. It's similar to it, but obviously we're not using photosystems here. So we've already seen or hinted at some of this stuff. Now we're just adapting it for Mr. Animal, and that would be us, okay? Where it happens, what enters, what leaves.
In summary, we have seen how the 4 stages of cellular respiration are responsible for converting the energy found in the glucose molecule into ATP, energy battery of the cell. On average, 36 ATP molecules are produced per glucose molecule that enter the cell. In the process of producing ATP, oxygen is brought in from the bloodstream to be the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain, and the carbon dioxide that is produced as a byproduct is released. The goal of cellular respiration is to transfer the energy from the food that we eat daily into ATP that our bodies can use. This process starts with the eating of a snack or meal and ends with capturing the energy from the complete breakdown of the nutrients into energy and carbon dioxide.
So this is what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at all of these steps here today, okay? We're going to be looking at glycolysis. This is the blood vessel right here. This is inside the cell, and this is the mitochondria, right? The powerhouse of the cell. Why is it the powerhouse of the cell? Because as you can see, the vast majority of where we get our energy from is happening inside that little bitty mitochondria. All right. So where all these are happening is going to be a question. What enters? What do we get out of it? Those are going to be things that we're looking at. Now, there's going to be some concepts here that I may hint at and talk about. Nutrition class, we get into a lot more of how those fuels are being broken down and getting into the cell. So we look at carbohydrates, and that's primarily what we're talking about today. But your body uses fats for energy. Your body can use proteins for energy as well. Right? And in nutrition class, we get into the, the digestive system a little bit, not a huge in-depth discovery of it like we do in anatomy or anatomy and phys class. But we look at the digestive system and how these nutrients are broken down, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, how we absorb them, how we utilize those basic monomers of those four biomolecules that we've discussed, macromolecules, and how we actually break them down and utilize them for energy. So in nutrition class, we dive into this a heck of a lot more, looking at all these specific macromolecules or biomolecules. So there is a little bit that we're just going to kind of gloss over a little bit. But if you have any questions, write them down in the chat box or shout them out during the lecture here, okay? Because there is kind of a lot of bit of stuff that we're just kind of bypassing here and just dumping into the system that is the ATP producer for us. Okay. And like I said, those are the biomolecules. That's how we discuss them. They're the macros, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, all right? Those are the major biomolecules. Yes, you can get energy production from alcohol, but it's not really usable. And the body just converts it into the F word, which we don't like. Fat. Remember, in cellular respiration, it is the exact opposite of photosynthesis. So here in cellular respiration, we are utilizing oxygen. Remember, that was a waste product in photosynthesis. Here, we utilize that waste, oxygen, and we give off the waste, carbon dioxide. So we produce carbon dioxide, and that gets picked up by the blood, and that gets removed out through the lungs. So it's the exact opposite of photosynthesis. It is ideally an aerobic process. Sorry. It is ideally an aerobic process. And when we see the word aerobic, you should think air, oxygen. Okay. We have anaerobic respiration, and we can utilize that. Not everybody in the body can utilize that, but we have situations where we don't have enough oxygen. Anaerobic means in the absence of oxygen. Well, that's not the best really definition of it or description of it, because if you didn't have oxygen, you'd suffocate and you would be dead. Anaerobic just means it's a state where we don't get enough oxygen. All right. So we have a couple different processes that we will do within the body to make energy if we have enough energy or enough oxygen, and if we don't necessarily have enough oxygen present. All right. And we'll talk about some of that anaerobic processes here, but it's not our primary maker of energy. The primary maker of energy is going to be aerobic cellular respiration. Complete breakdown of glucose to CO2 and H2O. Again, it's the exact opposite of the pathway that we just saw in photosynthesis. There are a couple different things that we can get, NAD and FAD. These are going to be very important coenzymes that are involved in the cellular respiration process. It's because of these two dudes right here that we are able to yield as much energy as we can. And we'll point out that as we kind of go through all the major steps of cellular respiration. So there you go. Glucose, oxygen, utilize those two things to get ATP, to get energy, and in the process produce carbon dioxide, which we exhale, and water, which is picked up by the blood and removed from the system, okay? Either through sweat, either through urination, whatever the case may be. And again, the most important organ that we have, or I'm sorry, organelle that we have for this thing is the mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. Why is it the powerhouse of the cell? Because this is where we're making 34 out of the 36 ATP. Here we go. NAD and FAD, these are what their names are. I don't know, I might put the names in there. Nicotinamide, adenine dinucleotide, flavine, adenine dinucleotide. These are our two major coenzymes. You get these from consuming B vitamins. So why is 5-hour energy so great to take to give you all that energy so you don't fall asleep in the afternoon? Well, it provides the building blocks to make these coenzymes. It also makes a number of enzymes or parts of enzymes. So it helps to speed up this metabolic pathway. So as we're kind of going through here and we see some of the stuff, you know, as we see some of the pathways, if I don't have it, I'll try to find it and show you here. But B vitamins make a number of enzymes that help to facilitate this thing called cellular respiration. And if it speeds it up at multiple different spots, it can increase your body's ability to make ATP so you don't fall asleep in the afternoon. You get those from taking B vitamins. So that's where you find some of these things, okay? It's just taking B vitamins. Each of these two guys, they will collect electrons. Okay. Technically, they're adding a hydrogen ion to their structure. But it's the electrons that those hydrogen ions carry that are really important, that are going to help us fund this thing called the electron transport chain, okay? Very similar to the photosystems that we saw. We're pumping across electrons, yada, 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 sucking all of the juice out of those things, okay? Just like we did in photosynthesis. We're going to do the same thing here to these electrons, all right? So it's these two guys that collect a lot of those electrons that we are producing along the way during the metabolic pathway. All right. So there are 4 phases, okay? There are 4 phases. It always starts with glycolysis. It always goes to this thing called the preparatory reaction, prep reaction, transition reaction. You can use any of those names. I don't really care. It just depends on the text. This text uses prep reaction. Another textbook that I use for anatomy and phys calls it the transition reaction. It's all the damn same, okay? So I don't really care which one you use as long as you use one that's correct. Citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain. These are the 4 phases or the 4 steps in this process of cellular respiration, okay? Aerobic cellular respiration, right? If we only have if we don't have enough oxygen and we get into an anaerobic state, which happens very easily, okay? If you've ever been outside running, and let's say you've never run before, okay? And you start to cramp up. Why are you cramping up? Well, you're not getting enough oxygen in to pump out some of the metabolic waste that is being produced. That is an anaerobic state. Another anaerobic state would be going, doing HIIT training or Tabata training, where you go as hard as you can for about 2 minutes. That's about enough time for the anaerobic pathway to run its course and be exhausted. So there are training methods. There are ways, if you are training, to get into an anaerobic state, either very quickly or take a long period of time if you're running. But you can get in an anaerobic state pretty easily. And in that case, you only use one of these, and that's going to be glycolysis. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. Glycolysis is when it begins. if we just look at the word glycolysis, you have glyco, which is glucose, and lysis means to break down, okay? So this is the destruction or the breakdown of glucose to yield energy. And this is just a thumbnail, okay? We'll dive into the parts and pieces here, but glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of a cell. Okay. It does make a little bit of ATP, and we'll get into how much here in a second. Not a whole hell of a lot, but it does make a little bit. In the process, we are bringing in this glucose molecule, and we are yielding out what's called pyruvate. It's a 3-carbon molecule. Again, we'll talk about that here in a second. But this is out in the cytoplasm of a cell, which is anaerobic in nature. All right, so we don't necessarily have to utilize oxygen, but it is the first step of aerobic cellular respiration, nonetheless. The prep reaction is needed to help escort basically pyruvate into the mitochondria. So this happens as pyruvate is entering into the mitochondria. So that's where you see the preparatory reaction occurring. We're going to make some NADH. We're going to release carbons as CO2. Okay. So here's our first kind of waste product. And we convert pyruvate into something that can be utilized by the Krebs cycle. The third phase, or the third step in cellular respiration, is going to be the Krebs cycle. As the transition reaction occurs, as soon as pyruvate enters into the mitochondria, this is also happening within the mitochondria as well, specifically in that mitochondrial matrix, the cytoplasm of a mitochondria, basically. You produce some NADH, some FADH2, so we're producing a number of coenzymes here, okay? They are gathering those electrons. They're taking all of these electrons to the electron transport chain, which is the last step in the process of cellular respiration. The electron transport chain, it occurs within the folds of the mitochondria. Those folds, hopefully you remember those names. That's called the cristae. And this is where we get a huge number of ATP. It varies by the cell, and it varies by, the cellular, the different tissues. Different tissues can yield a slightly different number. Sometimes you may have seen 32 ATP, 34 ATP, 36 ATP. So there is a number, there's a various number, and it just depends on the efficiency of the cell. If you just give me anywhere between 32 to 34 or 32 to 36, I'm not going to ding you on it. But if you say like 48, 40 ATP, that's wrong. If you're going to say 20 ATP, that's obviously wrong. So if you're within that little window, I'm not going to ding you. But if you're outside that window of 32 to 36 ATP, you will get dinged on it. Okay. So again, cytoplasm is where glycolysis happens. And then everybody else, PrEP, the citric acid or Krebs, and the electron transport chain, all of those three occur within Mr. Mitochondria. Again, that's why it's the powerhouse of the cell, because it's involved with the vast majority of helping to yield us ATP, energy. So let's jump in here, okay?